When I walked into my cousin's engagement party, I smiled. A small, serene smile, calm enough to fool everyone in the room. They had spent years treating me like I was nothing, not because I was truly poor, but because they wanted someone to look down on. The charity cousin, the one who had no money, no connections, and, according to their whispers, no ambition. I'd overheard it countless times. She'll never amount to anything. Why even invite her? She's just a burden. The poor girl still lives in that tiny apartment. Every sneer, every laugh, every dismissive glance, I stored carefully in my mind. Not with anger, but with patience. They had no idea how powerful their underestimation would become. I nodded politely when my aunt muttered something under her breath, thanked her for the invitation, and smiled. They assumed I didn't hear. They assumed I was naive. I had learned long ago that patience is power, and tonight, I intended to demonstrate it. The room was filled with glittering family members, laughing cousins, and loud uncles boasting about achievements. The chandeliers reflected their arrogance back at them, and the expensive floral arrangements only highlighted the contrast between their wealth and my modest elegance. I wore a simple dress, nothing flashy, yet perfectly tailored. It was understated power, and it suited me. As the party progressed, the subtle digs began. A cousin laughed at my dress. A distant relative whispered, loud enough to reach me, "She still lives in that dingy apartment on the east side." I smiled politely, thanked them for the compliment. The wording, not the intent. Their condescension only fueled me because they didn't realize one thing. While they were flaunting wealth and gossiping, I had been quietly building my own empire. Not inherited, not handed down, earned. Strategically, carefully, my investments, my businesses, my legal documents, all hidden from view, all consolidating quietly in my favor. Even now, I had quietly acquired shares in their family company, the same one they flaunted at every dinner table, boasting about profits, assets, and influence. They thought I had nothing, that they had nothing to fear. They were wrong. The evening rolled on, and the family's arrogance became more pronounced. My aunt, seated across from me, smirked as she described the lavish honeymoon gifts she had arranged for the real rich cousins, her tone dripping with superiority. She gestured towards me as if I were invisible. "They probably don't even know how to manage a credit card," she whispered to my mother. I nodded politely, thanked her again for the invitation. My outward calm was a mask. Inside, my mind raced through years of calculated moves. Each insult, each humiliation, had been logged and stored like pieces of a strategic puzzle. The toast came. My aunt raised her glass and addressed the room. "My dear cousin," she said, pointing directly at me, "is always so humble. Unlike some others." The room erupted in laughter. Some whispered comments about my old apartment, my simple life, my supposed lack of accomplishments. They thought the humiliation would sting. But I raised my glass, a subtle, serene smile playing on my lips. "Thank you," I said softly. "I've learned a lot from all of you, especially how to be underestimated." Heads turned. Whispers started. Confused glances flicked between family members. They had no idea what I meant. They didn't yet understand the power dynamics shifting in the room, because what they didn't know was that their mocking, their sneers, their dismissals, all of it had prepared me. I had studied them, analyzed their behavior, and invested quietly. I had quietly accumulated shares in the company they believed was untouchable. I had consolidated influence in subtle ways they would never suspect. And tonight, I was beginning the first step of my revenge. As the night wore on, I observed, I studied the way they laughed at me, the way they flaunted superiority, the way they assumed their control was absolute. Each smug comment became a mental note, each laugh an opportunity. And then, just as the champagne glasses clinked and the room relaxed, I let the first hint slip. The company shares. They're actually mine, I said softly, almost casually. The laughter faltered. Gasps echoed around the room. The aunt who had called me insignificant froze mid-sentence. Cousins stopped mid-laugh. Even my father, who had always brushed me aside, blinked in disbelief. You own them? My father asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Yes, I said, my voice calm, a quiet, controlled power in my words. And the contracts, the bank accounts, and the trust fund you assumed I'd never touch, all legally in my name. The room went silent. Shock and confusion replaced the arrogance that had filled the room moments ago. The family that had mocked me for years now saw me not as the meek, powerless cousin, but as the one holding the hidden leverage they never suspected existed. They had assumed my life of simplicity meant weakness. They had assumed that by humiliating me, they could maintain their dominance. But in truth, I had been building quietly while they flaunted, consolidating power where they saw none. I watched the faces around me, the horror, the disbelief, the dawning recognition. The cousin who had laughed at my apartment, the aunt who had called me naive, the parents who had ignored me, all were realizing for the first time that their underestimation had been their greatest mistake. And in that moment, I knew that the first step of my revenge had succeeded. The seed of doubt, fear, and respect had been planted. Tonight, they had humiliated me. Tomorrow, they would begin to understand the consequences of their arrogance. Cliffhanger. The first hint of my power has been revealed. They now know I own shares in the company, but they have no idea the full extent of what I've been building in secret. The real revenge is only beginning. The day after the engagement party, I woke early, coffee in hand, feeling a quiet satisfaction. Last night had been the first move, a gentle whisper of power, a soft reveal that would set the stage. But this was only the beginning. While the family had laughed, mocked, and whispered about my modest life, I had been quietly executing a plan that would make them rethink every assumption they'd ever held about me. Every insult they had hurled, every sneer they had given, every joke at my expense, all of it had fueled years of preparation. By mid-morning, the company's internal auditors began noticing anomalies in the shareholder reports. I had requested a routine verification of all shares and investment allocations. A harmless request on the surface, but one that triggered months of consolidation. The shares I had quietly acquired over the past few years, invisible to their casual oversight, were now starting to appear on official records. Within hours, my aunt, who had laughed at me just yesterday, was the first to notice. Her face turned pale as she reviewed the official documents. My cousins crowded around, their smirks fading into incredulous stares. She owns a significant portion? My youngest cousin whispered. Yes, I said softly, as if confirming the weather. My calmness was deliberate. It unnerved them more than anger or confrontation ever could. I've been investing quietly. It's all legal and accounted for. You underestimated me, and that's why this went unnoticed. The family erupted into whispers. A storm of confusion, panic, and disbelief. The aunt who had mocked my apartment turned ghostly white. She had always assumed I lacked the sophistication, the intelligence, and the strategic mind to engage in corporate maneuvering. Now she realized her assumptions had been her blind spot, and it had cost her. I let them stew in their horror. Every shocked glance, every tremor of panic, every realization was a testament to patience and careful planning. I had observed, calculated, and acted in secret. Their arrogance had made them predictable, and predictability is the foundation of strategy. By mid-afternoon, the tension escalated. My father, who had once ignored me in family discussions, called me to his study. His expression was a mixture of disbelief, concern, and I sensed it, admiration. "You've been planning this?" he asked cautiously, as if even speaking aloud might break the fragile illusion of control I had just revealed. "Yes," I admitted. "I've been preparing quietly while everyone else flaunted wealth and status. And I've learned a valuable lesson from this family. The loudest, proudest ones are the easiest to outmaneuver." He leaned back in his chair, studying me with a new awareness. The meek, quiet cousin he had overlooked for years was now a force to be reckoned with. Meanwhile, whispers spread throughout the family. My cousins, those who had mocked my small apartment and lack of ambition, were now whispering behind closed doors. "How did she? When did this happen? Are we at risk?" Their bravado had crumbled, replaced by evening. I called for a private family meeting, framed as a discussion about future plans for the company and family legacy. I arrived first, carrying a folder of carefully compiled financial statements, shareholder agreements, and investment records. The folder was heavy with proof, each page a testament to foresight and strategy. As everyone gathered, the room's energy shifted. Smiles faded, arrogance dissolved. They realized, without a word, that the quiet cousin they had mocked for years was now holding a piece of their empire. I began the meeting calmly. "I want to start with transparency," I said. "It's important that everyone understands the current shareholder distribution and recent allocations." I distributed the documents, allowing them to take in the numbers at their own pace. Gasps echoed as they flipped through the pages. Shares they assumed were untouchable. Trust allocations they believed were secure. Assets they had flaunted. All now bore my name. My aunt's hand trembled as she held the papers. My cousins stared, mouths open, unable to comprehend the shift. Even my father, the one who had dismissed me, was silent, processing the revelation. "You've acquired these shares quietly," my uncle finally stammered. "But why? How?" I smiled, calm, poised, because I knew that when the time came, being underestimated would be the greatest advantage. Every insult, every dismissal, every mockery, it built the perfect cover for this move. For the first time, the family began to understand the extent of my preparation. The shares were only the beginning. Hidden investments, dormant contracts, and strategic trust allocations had all been quietly aligned in my favor. "What about the company operations?" a cousin demanded. "Do you intend to take control?" I leaned back, letting the question hang in the air. "Control is not about arrogance or bullying," I said. "It's about responsibility and foresight. I'm here to protect what has been built, to ensure stability, and to correct oversight." Shock turned to fear as they realized the full magnitude of the shift. Their arrogance, their dismissals, their assumptions, all had left them vulnerable. The quiet cousin they had humiliated for years was now a central figure in their empire. By the end of the meeting, I had established the first step of realignment, not with confrontation, but with calm authority. I had revealed enough to instill doubt, but not yet unleashed the full scope of my strategy. As they left, whispering and questioning their own actions, I remained seated, serene. The first shock had been delivered. They now knew I was powerful, strategic, and untouchable. Cliffhanger. They know she owns shares in the family company, but the full extent of her control and the secret moves she has made are still unknown. The real revenge is about to unfold in the boardroom. The morning of the boardroom meeting. I arrived early. The headquarters felt different than the family estate or the engagement party. Here, in the polished corporate space, the rules were different. Authority mattered, evidence mattered, and most importantly, appearances could no longer hide incompetence. I had prepared everything meticulously: a folder of legal documents, company financials, shareholder contracts, and a detailed report on hidden investments. Every page represented years of patience and strategy, carefully aligned to maximize impact. When the family members began arriving, my cousins, uncles, aunts, even my father, I noticed subtle shifts. The arrogance they carried in social gatherings was muted here, replaced with uncertainty. They could sense the stakes had changed. The first to arrive was my aunt. Her face was pale, her smile forced. She greeted me formally. No condescension, no smirk. Even she, the one who had mocked my apartment, realized this was no longer a social setting. This was a meeting where the rules were mine as the other. Family members filed in. I chose my seat carefully. Not at the end, not hidden in the corner. I sat directly across from my eldest cousin, the one who had laughed at me most viciously, and placed my folder on the table. The subtle click, as it opened, drew eyes immediately. I cleared my throat. "Thank you all for coming," I began. "I called this meeting to discuss the current status of the company and the shareholder structure. It's important everyone is aware of the changes that have occurred and the responsibilities they entail." Whispers rippled through the room. The family knew I had acquired shares, but the full extent was still hidden. The tension was palpable. I began with the basics. Over the past few years, I have quietly acquired shares, strategically aligned investments, and ensured that the company's legal structure reflects a balance of power. It is now clear that the traditional assumptions of ownership and control no longer hold. My aunt gasped audibly. "What are you saying?" I leaned forward. "I am saying that the majority of shares, including dormant trusts and previously overlooked allocations, are now legally in my name. This is verifiable in the documents I have provided." I slid the folder across the table. Gasps erupted as my cousins opened the documents. Eyes widened. Some faces paled. Others froze, trying to process what this meant. My eldest cousin finally spoke. You own the company." "Yes," I said calmly. "And with that ownership comes responsibility. Not to destroy, not to humiliate, but to protect what has been built and ensure its continuity." They were silent. The magnitude of what I had revealed sank in. Their arrogance had blinded them to the quiet cousin they had dismissed. Now, that same cousin had control. I continued. "Beyond ownership, there are critical financial matters to address: debt consolidation, investment alignment, and oversight of offshore assets that were previously neglected. I have prepared a detailed restructuring plan to stabilize operations and ensure compliance." As I spoke, I watched their reactions. My aunt's face was tight with tension. My cousins exchanged glances of disbelief and fear. Even my father, usually the calmest, shifted uneasily in his chair. The quiet cousin they had mocked was no longer quiet. She was commanding the room. I unveiled the restructuring plan, detailing 3 phases. Phase 1, immediate assessment of liabilities and consolidation of non-performing assets. Phase 2, governance reform, including independent oversight and risk transparency. Phase 3, leadership evaluation based on performance metrics rather than familial assumptions. The room grew quieter with each point. I could see the panic in their eyes, the realization that their inheritance and influence were no longer guaranteed. My recommendations, I said, are designed to protect the company and its legacy. Any deviation from these steps risks financial collapse, regulatory scrutiny, and public scandal. This is not a threat. It is reality. My aunt's voice trembled. You've been planning this. Yes, I replied evenly. Every insult, every dismissal, every mocking comment over the years provided clarity. I learned how to navigate the family, the company, and the legal structures. I prepared quietly while you flaunted power. The tension was unbearable. My cousins, once confident, now realized the stakes. Their whispers had stopped. The room was still except for the sound of pages flipping and pens scribbling notes. Finally, my eldest cousin stood, a mixture of anger and disbelief on his face. So what now? You're taking control. I looked directly at him. Eyes steady, voice calm. Control is not about arrogance or intimidation. It is about responsibility, foresight, and strategic action. I will assume temporary leadership to implement the restructuring plan. After that, performance and compliance metrics will determine future leadership for everyone, including you. His mouth opened, but no words came. He had realized too late that power was not inherited, but earned. And I had earned it, quietly, methodically, and without their knowledge. The board members, many of whom had previously sided with my cousins, began nodding. She's right. One whispered, we've ignored oversight for too long. By the end of the meeting, the vote was unanimous. My control, though framed as temporary, was official. The family that had mocked me, humiliated me, and dismissed me had been forced to acknowledge my authority. As the meeting adjourned, I collected my documents and prepared to leave. My aunt approached cautiously. You could have warned us, she said. I tried, I replied softly. But warnings are ignored when arrogance blinds people. The family had learned a harsh lesson. Underestimation is dangerous. And tonight, the quiet cousin was the storm no one had seen coming. Cliffhanger. They now realize her control. But a deeper secret, an offshore account tied directly to the family finances, is about to be revealed, threatening to escalate the stakes even further. The boardroom had fallen silent. The family, once confident and smug, now sat in quiet disbelief. They had finally acknowledged that I held authority, yet none of them suspected the depth of what I had prepared. The first shock was ownership of shares. The second shock was my temporary leadership. But the third, the final revelation, would leave them utterly speechless. It began with a routine audit. An analyst had flagged a dormant offshore account tied to the family company. At first glance, it appeared to be a routine reserve, a contingency fund tucked away for emergencies. But the signature authorizing the transactions? My eldest cousin, the same one who had mocked me relentlessly at family gatherings. I had known about this account for months. I had quietly traced every transfer, every withdrawal, every discrepancy. The numbers weren't small. They weren't incidental. This account contained enough undeclared capital to trigger regulatory investigation. If discovered by external auditors, I called an emergency board meeting, framed, of course, as a precautionary review. I arrived first, folder in hand, poised and calm. The family members arrived one by one, their confidence replaced by unease. My aunt's forced smile faltered. My cousins exchanged anxious glances. Even my father, who had been my silent supporter, looked uneasy at the prospect of a full-scale financial disclosure. "Thank you all for coming," I began. "This is a matter of utmost importance. We've discovered a dormant account that requires immediate attention. It involves undeclared capital and risks for the company if left unaddressed." Gasps spread across the room. Eyes widened. My cousins leaned forward. My aunt's hand trembled as she clutched her documents. "Who authorized it?" my father asked, his voice tight. "Authorized?" I replied calmly, glancing around. "Yes, authorized. By one of our family members. Undocumented, unreported, and potentially legally compromising." They looked at me, stunned. My voice was calm, but every word carried weight. The power balance had shifted completely. The eldest cousin finally spoke. You're going to expose me." His face was pale, lips trembling. I said softly, "but I don't intend to destroy anyone. I intend to correct oversight and protect the company, which is more important than personal vengeance." Silence fell. The family realized, for the first time, that I had the knowledge, the control, and the leverage. My calm demeanor made them realize that the consequences were real, but I was offering mercy. "Step 1, I continued, is immediate suspension of the executive responsible for these unauthorized withdrawals. My cousin. Step 2 is full disclosure to internal compliance and voluntary reporting to regulators, framed as internal correction. Step 3 is repayment and restructuring of the misallocated funds." The room was tense. My aunt's eyes filled with panic. My cousins could hardly speak. They had mocked me for years, humiliated me in private, and assumed I had no capacity to act. And now, here I was, not only taking control but doing so with calculated precision. "You could have sent him to prison," my uncle whispered. "Yes," I said calmly. "I could. But power isn't about destruction. It's about responsibility. And true strength is knowing you could destroy someone and choosing not to." Even my father nodded, understanding finally dawning. The quiet cousin they had dismissed was the one holding the storm. The next hours involved careful execution. Compliance teams were briefed. Legal documents were reviewed and ratified. The dormant account was disclosed to regulators as part of voluntary internal correction. My cousin was suspended from executive duties, his authority curtailed. But no criminal charges were filed. At least, not publicly. The board members, once loyal to the arrogant cousins, now looked to me for guidance. I was no longer the meek, underestimated family member. I was the steward of the empire. Every decision, every directive, came with authority and legitimacy. Finally, I addressed the family directly. Humiliation, underestimation, and arrogance cannot coexist with strategy and patience. You all learned this tonight. The company survives. Our legacy is intact, and the lessons are clear. Never underestimate quiet intelligence. They were silent. My cousins, who had once laughed at me, now understood fully that I had orchestrated a reversal they could not have imagined. The aunt who had mocked my apartment and called me insignificant sat quietly, no words coming. Even my father, proud and stern as ever, nodded slowly in acknowledgement. Later that evening, after the board meeting, my cousin approached me privately. His voice was subdued, almost broken. I misjudged you. I thought this was a game. I didn't realize. I smiled faintly, letting him finish his thought. You didn't realize what happens when arrogance meets strategy. You had every chance to notice, and ignored it. He hung his head. No anger, no confrontation, only quiet regret. The final move of my revenge wasn't punishment. It wasn't humiliation. It wasn't public exposure. It was proof. Proof that underestimation has consequences. Proof that intelligence and patience outweigh arrogance. Proof that the quietest, meekest person in the room may hold the ultimate power by the end of the week. Operations were stable. The company was secure. The offshore account had been corrected. Legally, leadership restructuring was complete. My cousins had been humbled. My aunt had been forced to acknowledge my authority, and my father had been vindicated in his trust in me. I left the headquarters that evening with the calm satisfaction of someone who had won without losing their integrity. The family had been taught a lesson in humility, patience, and strategy, and the one they had mocked for years, the quiet cousin, the charity case, the underestimated one, had emerged not just victorious, but wise, merciful, and undeniably powerful. Sometimes, the most underestimated person in the room is the one controlling everything. And sometimes, revenge isn't about destruction. It's about strategic justice delivered with patience, precision, and grace.